this. All right, you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to our CookiePitch Ask Me Anything event with Appert and Sandra Salsbury. What I'll do is just kind of do a little bit of housekeeping rules before we get started, and just kind of a general little quick introduction of the our guest tonight. So we want our Ask Me Anything events to be safe, inclusive spaces that make us all feel warm, like we're wrapped in a big tortilla and covered in deliciousness. These events are meant to be filled with whimsy and fun. Any discriminatory, political, racist, targeting, harassing, or offensive language, messages, or behaviors grounds for removal from CookiePitch and Ask Me Anything event, and disbarring from participation in future events subject to the discretion of us, the organizers. And on that note, we actually have a big announcement. This is top secret. Until Friday, I will be doing a tweet thread about this on Friday, but long story short, CookiePitch is going to become CookiePitch. And so we're excited about it. We've got good reasons for doing it, and we'll lay those out on Friday. But the main reason is just I stumbled on some tweets. Nobody contacted me about it. Nobody, reached out to me or threatened to cancel me or anything. But I stumbled on some tweets that made me realize that not everybody was in love with the name CookiePitch or the artwork or the branding. And so we wanted to do something a little bit more innocuous and inclusive. Karen, will you still stay on as our, instead of our taco diversity officer, will you be our chief cookie diversity officer to make sure that we have vegan and gluten-free and all that other stuff?
Absolutely. I would love to.
Good. All right. Thank you. Okay. In terms of how the chat's going to go, we've got some questions that came in beforehand on Twitter. And so I'll ask some of those, and then Brenna is going to keep an eye on the chat. And so if you've got questions, you can just put them in the chat and she'll monitor that. And then also you can raise your hand. And then if I don't happen to see it, Brenna will chime in and note that we've got a question. So feel free to chime in when you do have a question. But other than that, please keep yourself muted. So your your dogs and your children and your cell phones and all the rest don't interrupt too much. And with that, I'll just very briefly introduce our guests. Basically, just note that Anne's book just came out a week ago today, her wonderful book, Blob. And then I'll have her talk about her book a little bit for about 5 minutes or so, introduce herself and the book. And then we'll jump to Sandra and have her introduce her book, The Best Friend in the World, for about 5 minutes. And then we'll just go into the questions after that. So with that, I will stop the share. And then also a reminder that after the event goes from 5 to 6 p.m. So it goes for an hour, but at the end of the hour, we will stop the recording. So this is being recorded. And then after that, you're welcome to stick around and just do kind of just a group chat. Anybody can ask anybody questions. There might be people that you see on here that you know from Twitter and have never gotten the chance to talk to before. And this is your chance to, just informal chat with people. It's just kind of a virtual after party. And they usually run for about 45 minutes or so, and they're usually a lot of fun. So with that, I will just pass it over to Anne in her awesome blob costume. And yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm very excited to talk to all of you, and hopefully you have some great questions for us. A little bit about me. I live in New Jersey, so it is a little later here, but I have been writing and illustrating for about 14 years now. I signed with an agent a couple of years ago, and then Blob was the first book that I sold. Now a little bit about Blob. Do you want to know the journey to Blob or just about the book itself?
A little bit of both.
Okay. So Blob was a joke between me and a friend because I draw very blobby animals and nobody could tell what they were. So I said I should just stop drawing animals and draw a blob instead. And then this character popped into my head. from there, it was pretty quick to write a draft, and I got it out on submission probably within 2 months, which is pretty quick for a book dummy because illustrations take a long time. And we got a lot of rejections, including from HarperCollins. And then I met my editor at a portfolio critique event, and she loved Blob. And then so HarperCollins ended up buying it. And now, 2 years later, it is a book. And then Blob is just about a character who is an ambiguous being who can be whatever animal you want. But they get tired of that and decide they want to be what they want to be, but they have to figure that out. And so it's a journey of self-discovery and sticking up for who you are and making people recognize you for who you are.
That's awesome. Love it. All right. Sandra, go ahead.
So my book is Best Friend in the Whole World. I don't know how. I've been an illustrator for, I'm not even sure how long. I went to art school. Well, I originally went to college with the intention of majoring in biology. And I had about 3 weeks of intro to bio. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. I hate this. And so then I switched to English, and then it was sort of like, well, if I'm going to choose a path that has no financial security, I might as well just go to art school instead. And so I studied illustration, and I took a children's illustration class my last semester of school with Win Pham. She didn't teach illustration for that long at my school, so I feel really lucky to have been taught by her. It was also really terrifying. And so then at that point, I was like, okay, I don't have a portfolio for children's illustration. So I stayed on and got a master's. And then once I graduated in 2009, I feel like it's finishing art school is a funny thing because you basically never want to do art again once you're done. So I took a break and I held other jobs. And then finally, in about 2016, I got the idea for Best Friend in the Whole World. And that's sort of when I decided to really focus on my illustration career, my children's book career, and go from I had done some small illustration jobs and educational work and that kind of thing. And I wanted to move on to trade publishing. So I sort of buckled down and worked on my dummy. Unlike Anne, mine did not come about quickly. I think I got the idea in 2016. I think I started querying agents maybe the end of 2017. And then I submitted it to the SCBWI Don Friedman grant and received that in 2018. And then when you get an award from SCBWI, agents and find out that you exist. So I got my agent that way. And we sold the book in 2019 and it came out in March. And Best Friend in the Whole World came about because when I have this memory of when I was a kid, I found the stick that I became obsessed with for a few hours. And I would just I was swinging it around and I kept hitting my family members accidentally with the stick. And so my dad took it away from me and threw it into the woods, which I probably deserved, but I was devastated. And I just remember that for years, just sort of this obsession with this inanimate object. And that kind of became the story of this character that finds this pine cone, and that pine cone becomes his best friend, and sort of about, finding other friends from that.
That's really cute. What was it like having a book come out in the midst of the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting. Anne and I don't know when Anne's book sold, but we had the same deadline for our final art, which when you're an author illustrator, you sort of do the edits and then the final art is the last part of the project. And so we both had a July 15th deadline. And we ended up working sort of simultaneously. And it was interesting because at the time when I was working on it, I remember thinking like, oh, well, at least my book isn't coming out now. You know, by the time it comes out, like we'll be able to have these in-person events and this will all be over. Ha ha ha. So, you know, obviously that didn't happen. I feel like maybe we missed out on some normal book release things like the, you know, going to bookstores and signing and, you know, reaching our audience. Like I feel like we have very limited access to our readers.
Have you gotten any kind of guidance on how to, like, from the publishers? Do they have any kind of, like, you know, compensatory measures to reach people, or?
And is yours?
If they do, they haven't shared all of them with me. I do know that they sent blob out to reviewers, and that they sent them to some Instagram influencers and things like that. I was asked to write a marketing letter that they sent in their catalog, I think, and I think that went to librarians. I'm not actually sure. Beyond that, I don't know if they're doing anything.
My publisher, I feel like, did a good job promoting my book. My publisher is Peachtree. They are, you know, smaller, but I feel like they did a really good job with my book. Because sometimes you hear that like a smaller publisher might not be able to market your book as well, but I think they did a good job. My book got reviewed in the New York Times, which was very unexpected. And I feel like if they have that reach, then like I can't really complain, can I? But I don't know that they did anything different because of the pandemic versus I think they did less because a lot of the things that they would have been able to arrange, they couldn't. And I don't know that they've figured it out yet, because they do some virtual events, but the thing about virtual events is that they don't translate to book sales. So I think publishers have sort of like shifted away from that because it's not, you know, they're a business and they want to make money, and creating all these virtual events doesn't do that for them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I do know that had the pandemic slowed down a little bit before mine came out, that is something that HarperCollins generally would have helped me to reach out to bookstores and stuff, but nobody around here is doing in-person events. So.
All right. Well, perhaps the most important question of the night, and you saw this on Twitter. How do you pronounce that word that's the Gouache?
Now I'm overthinking it, but I pronounce it gouache.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was. Abby, who said that it, you know, rhymes with the gourd family, something like Gumpkin. That I really like that answer. But yes, it's gouache.
Gouache. Okay.
You just have to like forget what it looks like, because I have to Google it anytime I have to type it, because I don't know how to spell it. I only know how to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, you could give me $1 million and an hour to study, and I wouldn't be able to say spell bureaucracy or entrepreneur. Those are just like my two, like, I just will never be able to spell it. So yeah, gouache. All right, that's helpful.
It makes me think of the Irish name Siobhan. Like if I look at the name Siobhan, I have to remember that it's pronounced completely differently than what I would expect from the spelling. So same for gouache.
That's funny. All right, let's see. Brenna, do we have any questions from the chat?
There was one for Anne, but Anne already answered it. They let's see. Audrey asked about whether or not she had any other books out on submission.
Oh, good question.
Do you want to go into it further?
I could, yeah. So when I signed with my agent, we worked on a dummy that we put out. I signed with my agent, I think I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2017. And we worked on a dummy together for a little bit that we put out on submission. I think it went out a couple of times. It never sold. I can't remember. There was one other one that we had sent to very few editors, but we kept getting requests for, like, not requests for revision, saying that they couldn't have it the way it was. So that one's been I'm working on it still. And then I actually worked on a dummy with an editor at a publishing house together. We came up with a story, I put together a dummy, and then she couldn't sell her acquisitions team on it. So I have 3 or 4 picture book dummies that have either been about to go out or were out, and they are still works in progress.
Okay.
So
about you,
we have
Sandra?
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Sandra, do you have any, what do you got? What do you have in the oven, I guess?
So Best Friend in the Whole World is actually, it's the only book I ever queried agents with. It was the only book I ever went on sub with. So, but I signed with my agent after I got the Don Freeman grant, and I signed with my agent. We did this small revision to the book. We changed the end a bit. It turned out to be like way better. So now I'm like, agents are the best. Please make my book better. And we went on sub, and I was on sub for about 7 months. We got, a bunch of like really nice rejections. Sorry, I'm trying to think of how it went. And so then I got interest from the publisher. They wanted a revision, which they wanted, basically they wanted Roland to have parents in the background, because they're like, this is a child, and he goes to a neighbor's house and knocks on the door, and they're like, we don't want children doing that. It was sort of like a safety question. So they wanted the story written to essentially keep the same story, but add parents in the background, mostly within the illustrations. So I did the revision. I wasn't in love with it, so I'm glad my publisher Peachtree ended up making an offer. I also received an offer from Peachtree, and so then it ended up, 7 months of nothing. Then suddenly I had interest from publishers, so it can take a while. But this was also, pre-pandemic, and I think that for picture book sales, specifically for debuts, I think things really changed. In terms of acquisitions, I do think it's a lot harder to sell a debut now. And then I don't know if it's a secret. They never told me to keep it a secret. I have a second book with my same publisher that should come out theoretically in 2023.
Oh, nice. All right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. So do you consider yourselves primarily authors that illustrate, or illustrators that are authors, or just straight author illustrators? That's for both of you.
I think equally an author illustrator. I'm working on projects for a couple different age categories. Some are more written, some are more illustrated. However, it took me a long time to think of myself as an illustrator, even though most people think of that first, I think, when they think of me. But for a long time, I thought I'm a writer who illustrates. But it was a process. Even though I went to art school, I don't know.
Okay.
Imposter syndrome is strong.
I'm the opposite of Anne, where I think of myself as an illustrator. And then I basically picked up writing to help my illustration career. The agents I was interested in were, I realized that they were mostly representing author illustrators or just authors, people who, had a book that they could then send on submission rather than marketing me as an illustrator. And so then I decided that if I wanted that kind of agent, then I needed to learn how to write. And so then I did. And so I don't know that I even now identify as, a writer or an author, but, maybe someone down the line, I'll be able to say yes, I'm a writer.
All right. Brenna, do we have more questions from the chat?
Yeah, we do. So the first one is, what's your medium of choice, and do you feel versatile bouncing back and forth between them based on the project? For both of you.
So I primarily work in watercolor. My book is done entirely in traditional watercolor. And I want to sort of figure out a digital style, just because there's a lot of convenience for working digitally. You don't have all the supplies, you don't have the paper, you don't have to scan. It ends up being a faster process because you get to skip all the stuff you have to do with physical art. But I'm still working on that. it's difficult. I feel like it's really difficult to transition into a new style when you have a solid foundation in one already, because, you know, I'm good at watercolor. Why would I use something else when I have something I'm already good at? But I'm hoping to sort of push myself into new styles.
When I first got out of art school, I worked primarily in watercolor and then moved to gouache. And then now I work 100% digitally in Procreate on the iPad. Except for my next book, I have a second book I'm working on with HarperCollins that they want done in watercolor, because I made the mistake of posting watercolors on my Instagram that I did for fun. And they said, great, we want this for your next book. So it's going to be very different from Bob. So.
Speaking of Instagram, it seems like Instagram, the illustrators tend to gravitate more towards Instagram and writers more towards Twitter. Is that right? Or any thoughts on social media use for author illustrators?
Personally, I think that you sort of have to, there's so many different platforms to use. You have to figure out which ones you enjoy using and then just stick with those. I, for some reason, like, I hate Instagram. I don't know why. I just like, I'm so bad at posting on it. I think what I don't like about it is it's basically just a place to showcase your art, and that's it. And what I really like about social media is the social part of it. I like Twitter, I like the interactions, I like the relationships, and I don't think that you can have the same kind of community on Instagram as you do on Twitter. And so I find myself much more drawn to Twitter than Instagram. And then you have something like Facebook, which, you know, you would think, you know, it allows images in it and communities, but I find that the demographics are not necessarily ones I enjoy participating in all the time.
Yeah, my Facebook, I barely go on there anymore, just because, you know, I got weird uncles and cousins, and, you know, it's just a cesspool. I just go and check my messages once a day and see if there's anything important. But Anne, any thoughts on social media?
I feel pretty similarly to Sandra. I like Twitter better. I think it's easier to update. It's easier to have a community. Instagram relies so heavily on images and now on video, which requires a lot of time to curate and figure out. And you don't get the visibility that everybody says you should, like posting all the time. It becomes very much a headache. So I prefer Twitter as well. And Facebook, I barely ever go on.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I have a question that came in earlier in the week. Do you have a separate art director for your illustrations? I guess well, I don't know. That's all they wrote. So interpret it how you will. Do you have a separate art director for your illustrations? When it comes, I guess, how much creative control do you have when it comes to your writing and your art? I know you're working with, you know, agents and editors in making revisions, but how much do you get in terms of art direction?
So I feel like that's a question that makes sense for illustrators. Like, do you have a separate art director? So with my publisher, I did technically have an art director. I think she was really more of a book designer than an art director, because she didn't really give me much art direction. We sort of discussed, there was like, I think the only note that she gave me was like, please move this line so the text fits better on one spread, and everything else. I guess we sort of changed a little bit of how some images were framed, but there wasn't, what the final book looks like is very true to what my dummy looked like. Yeah, so I feel like most of that was handled by my editor, who also, she didn't really give art guidance either. And then, so the book I'm working on now, they bought it on a very, very rough dummy. And so there might be a lot more art notes this time. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, for Blob, I also worked with a book designer. It basically, we changed some colors. They changed the format of the book. Blob was a square dummy, and now it's a vertical book. But most, yeah, and well, this might be funny to people. They did go through and tell me to add Blob's arms on every page because I did forget my character's arms, apparently. But there wasn't much direction in terms of that. I am working with the same designer for my second book, but I don't know what the process of that will be like because the book was based on an idea that I then wrote up several different ideas for my editor. We picked one, we edited it. And so there was no art really to start. So it should be exciting.
Okay. Going back to Blob, a question had come in earlier this week as well. How personal is Blob to you in terms of, I don't know, that's what they're, but how personal is Blob to you?
Oh, very personal. I didn't realize that when I wrote it because I was just trying to be funny when I wrote it. Honestly, it didn't really occur to me until my editor asked me to write about it, how much of me is in the book. There are certain things in the illustrations that are direct nods to my family members, like Blob is a panda first, and my twin sister's favorite animal is a panda.
Oh, that's cute.
My younger sister likes giraffes, so Blob is a giraffe at one point. So there's little things like that throughout the book. But then I don't want to give too many spoilers, but Blob does insist often on being called Blob because the narrator forgets the L in the name, hence the cover. And I did that for two reasons. One is that my name is Anne with an E, and I can't even tell you, even though I spell it that way everywhere, how many people spell it wrong. And then also being a twin, people never called me the right name growing up. So it was very important to me to have a character who was insistent on being called the right thing all the time. So I think in many ways, Blob has a lot of me in them.
That's awesome.
And then the snarkiness of the narrator is also a little bit me, to be honest.
All right, let's see. Brenna, any more questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's a bunch. So can you guys tell us a little bit more about what is involved in creating a dummy?
Yeah, I actually have some dummies here. So I made a lot of physical dummies. I would print it out like every version because I think it really helps to like flip through it. So I don't know which version this is, but like you can see sort of like my sketches. My sketches are very detailed. I don't think that this level of finish is necessary for someone's dummy. That being said, I think most people I know that debuted as author illustrators had very tight dummies. I had a Twitter thread a while ago asking people to share examples of the first dummy that they did that was acquired. And a lot of them are pretty, in my opinion, pretty tight sketches. And then you also have to do some color, some finished spreads. They recommend doing 2 to 3. Again, I kind of did a lot because I worked on the book for a long time. And so in part of, as I worked on the book, I explored a lot of the different scenes. And so I just ended up with a lot of full color illustrations in my final dummy. But like these physical versions are not actually that important for the acquisitions process. What you really need is a PDF. And so when I submit a dummy, I like my PDF to have a finished cover because that's the first thing they see, and you want it to be like really eye-catching and colorful and sort of representing what the book will look like. So I do a finished cover and I do 3 full illustrated spreads, and then the rest are sketched out.
Ditto, except mine are digital dummies, but otherwise everything that Sandra just said.
All right. What other questions do we have, Brenna?
Yeah, there's sort of a follow-up to the dummy question. So they were asking, are they typically built with pencils and then, illustrations are rendered in full color, or is it kind of up to how you...
Whatever media you like to work it.
Okay.
I mean, you should work, it's a sketch. So it should, if you want to sketch in color, I guess you can, that seems like a lot of work. So I think most people will do their sketch values, but you could do digital sketches, you could do physical sketches and then scan them. You do have to end up with a digital file, that PDF in the end, because that is what will be submitted. But however you work is the way you work. And if you want to do your entire dummy with like a ballpoint pen, that's fine. No one is gonna, stop you.
So this next question is for Sandra. Sandra, you had an excellent Twitter pitch about simplification and your illustration style. Do you have any advice for an illustrator who wants to push or develop their own style?
I probably have advice I should take myself. I think the way that I like to approach things is really to study other illustrators. I like to create Pinterest boards of, illustrations I like, just illustrator styles, someone who like their work catches my eye. I'll have like a character board, I'll have a backgrounds board, I'll have like colors, and basically you steal what you like. And I think that because simplification is really difficult, and when you're looking at something, it's so easy to get caught up in details that you don't need. And so if you look at someone else's work and you're like, I really like, how they have approached to, the silhouette, and then you study that. And then when you draw something, you're never going to if you're not copying them directly, you can't steal someone's style. I really just don't believe that's possible. But you can use their style to inform your own. And that is sort of how you discover a way to redirect your own style.
And then there was one more for Sandra. Did your editor at Peachtree ask for a lot of edits or revisions to your text?
No, I ended up asking to do revisions for my text because there was, it's funny because I received offers from 2 publishers, and one of the publishers said, we really love your book, except this one scene needs to be tweaked because we don't think that the theme is really coming through strong enough. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't thought about the theme of my book at all. And then my Peachtree editor was like, this is great. And I said, well, what if we tweak this one scene? And so I ended up making these changes that I wanted to make. But other than that, it was mostly changing words and, adding or subtracting commas and that kind of thing.
And then, so Sandra, you've done work for hire, and I don't know if you have, but they were wondering whether or not you could talk about work for hire a little bit more in your experience with that.
Yeah, so I did some illustration work for hire. Though I did it mostly with educational publishers. I've also gotten random jobs. So in sort of like editorial work. For the educational work, those jobs actually came basically through SCBWI. When they had the conference, when they had in-person conferences, I would go to the LA conference every year, and I would participate in the portfolio display. And, publishers take postcards, and then they contact illustrators after the event sometimes. And so I had one educational publisher who had, picked up my postcard and offered me some work. And so I did, I don't remember how many books for them, something like 4 or 5 books with them, which educational illustration is not glamorous. It's heavily art directed. They tell you exactly what they need. But in some ways it's, they're very quick projects. You do them, you turn them in, and then they're done, which is nice. And then also for the editorial work, I had this very weird 15 minutes of internet fame a while back. And so from there, I had some artwork that went viral on Reddit. And so then I got some illustration jobs from that.
I have not done work for hire. So.
It's a lot more fun to do a book, to do like trade books. And of course, it's a lot more fun to illustrate your own stories than it is to do like an educational, book that's sort of like a leveled reader or something.
So I've got a question. This is actually from our last one, our last AMA that we never got around to asking. This one came from Kim Hoa. And she said, would you rather be a New York Times bestseller or win the Newbery and Caldecott medals?
Newbery and Caldecott, 100%.
I mean, you want to win the Newbery. Well, I mean, I feel like winning the Newbery means writing a lot of words, which that sounds like a lot of work. But if you win the Caldecott or the Newbery, you become a New York Times bestseller. They
Exactly.
always do. Like the next week, you look at the paper, and those are the books that are in the bestseller list. So I mean, that's the one you got to pick.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Any other questions from the chat, Brenna?
Yeah, so I know we just talked about Instagram versus Twitter, but do you think in general having a social media presence is important in terms of, you know, being a writer, illustrator, either or?
I feel like I'm always going first. Anne, do you want to go first?
Sure.
I also have an answer ready.
I want to say yes, it's important. I don't know if that's because I want to believe it's important because I spend a lot of time on social media. But I do know, like when I first posted an image of Blob on Twitter, I had an editor contact my agent to be like, hey, does Anne have a story for this image I found on Twitter? So, but beyond that, I think that it can be important to finding the people you need to connect with to form community. I mean, Twitter is how I met Sandra. So yes, I do know also a lot of art directors look for art on Instagram. They won't tell us how, but they do it. So I want to say yes, I don't really necessarily have good tips about how to get seen, but I think being consistent and not just doing self-promotion, but actually interacting with people and stuff is important.
So I think, yes, if you want to be a traditionally published author or illustrator, you need to be on social media because your publisher will ask, will you promote your book on social media? And if you say no, they're going to be less interested in your project. I don't know if Anne was asked this question, but like every publisher that I spoke to about my book asked me about my willingness and my ability to promote my book on social media. And so I know a lot of people, I'm not convinced that an individual author has any control over the sales of their book through social media promotion. Like that's, we don't have that kind of control, like reach with it. Like, no matter how many times you tweet about your book, like your friends are going to buy it. And then, someone else, it's not like they're going to see your tweet about it for like the 15th time and say like, oh, well, this time now I'll go pre-order the book. I don't necessarily know that that's true. But I guess maybe I shouldn't say that it feels a bit performative to promote your book on social media, but it's sort of a necessary part of the job. Because eventually, theoretically, you will have more reach. And so you have to start building sometime.
Did they ask you about like how many followers you had and things like that, or no?
No, they can just look that up.
Yeah, I don't think I was asked by my publisher. When they told me what they were going to do for promotion, they told me what some of the stuff that they were going to do on social media. And then I asked my editor, like, do you want to see my plan for what I'm going to do? And they were like, yeah, sure. But I don't remember being asked about promoting my book.
Well, let's see. Kind of switching gears in terms of your writing process. Are you plotters or pantsers?
I'm a plotter. I even write an outline for a picture book.
I don't know. I call myself a pantser, but I often won't write anything down until I have a very clear idea in my head of like actual sentences I want in the book. So I guess technically I'm plotting in my head, but I don't do an outline. I don't figure out like this is where it's going to begin and this is where it's going to end. I just wait to put anything on the page until I have at least 60% of the book figured out in my head. For a picture book, for longer works, I just start writing and see where it goes.
All right. Any other questions, Brenna?
Yeah, this one's for Anne. It says, Anne, I'm a huge fan of the mini comics and characters that you post on your Instagram page. When did you start making them and have they helped you come up with any story ideas?
That's a good question. I don't know when I started making them. I think it might have been when I switched to Procreate. I would poll my Instagram followers about what animal I should draw, and then I would draw those animals. But my brain always goes to story, so sometimes they would just be one image, but sometimes they would be three. I started intentionally making them comics probably after I participated in a very popular drawing challenge in October a couple times, and I made those 30-day stories. So all of the images told a complete story. And then once I did that, I got more intentional about my animal drawings being mini comics every time I did them. I've had to take a break for book promo, but I hope to get back to them. And they definitely have inspired book ideas. One of them I am currently working on turning into a young graphic novel, and the text is written. I just have to panel it.
Is that something, do you like communicate with your agents about that, or you just kind of dive in and do it and then say, hey, look what I did?
It depends on the project for me. I switched agents this year because my first agent left agenting. So when I met with my agent to see if we were going to be a good fit, I kind of went over all the types of projects I like to work on. So she knows that I like to work on those. But for a specific project, she won't see anything until I have a manuscript. I don't generally throw out ideas before there's something concrete to show her.
I basically do a whole dummy and then send that to my agent. I've tried sending her manuscripts, but I feel like my work really, the words are only half the book, and there's so much that's done in the art that I just feel like I'm not really communicating my story that well if it's just the manuscript. So I sketch out, and as I work on the dummy, my work goes through so many revisions, so that if I were to send just the manuscript, it's just not going to be very good. And so I end up basically taking everything to the level of a very, very rough dummy, and then I'll send it to her.
What word count do you shoot for? Are you like in a 500 range, kind of standard, or do you not pay that much attention to it?
I prefer to keep it under 400 because that gives you some flexibility to increase word count.
I don't actually think about word count. I could not tell you how many words Blob has. I do tend to think that I write very short, so it's usually in the 200 to 400 range, but I actually have no idea.
Oh. All right, Brenna, what else we got?
So have either of you illustrated someone else's books? And if so, what was that like?
I don't believe Anne has, so I'm just gonna go right into this. I have illustrated other people's books. I did the work for hire books, and I also did my very first illustration job was for a small local publisher, and then I did a couple books where I illustrated for people who were self-publishing. I think every illustrator, or not every illustrator, many illustrators do that early in their career before they get established. And I find that with those projects, I was kept on a pretty tight leash, so I didn't enjoy them that much. I'm open to the idea of illustrating other people's manuscripts in sort of the more traditional way where I'm given a lot more creative freedom. So my previous experiences were not great, but I don't think that future experiences will necessarily be like that.
I haven't technically illustrated anyone else's book, although I would love to. I did, however, at my agency, sometimes they'll pair a writer with an illustrator to put something out on submission that they think would be stronger with illustrations. So I did that once, and they ended up selling the story, but not with my illustrations. So if I did that again, I would probably just do sample art and not do a full dummy. But I have not actually illustrated anyone else's text, although I would love to.
All right, Brenna.
Do you guys have critique partners or writing groups, and how important have they been in your process?
I have a really bad habit of joining way too many critique and writing groups. So I think I am currently in 3 writing groups. I find them very helpful. There are reasons I'm in each of them and that I haven't left them. I'm not in any illustration critique groups. I am in several writing ones with authors who do various levels of writing. So one, it's mostly picture books, but then 2 of them also have writers who do YA. So because I like to experiment in everything from board books to middle grade, it's nice to have that flexibility between critique groups. And also then I can get fresh eyes on a story if one group has seen it too many times. And in the one group, there are illustrators, so I could also get feedback on work there. I was in an illustration critique group for a little bit, but they just don't work as well for me online as writing groups do.
I was in a critique group for several years. Some of my critique group members are actually here today. And I took some time off. At the beginning of this year, I got pregnant, and I was like, I also sold the book to a publisher. And I find that once you sell your book and you have your editor and your art director, you don't take that book to your crit group anymore, because their opinions don't matter anymore. It's only the opinion of the publisher. And so I knew I wouldn't have anything to bring to my crit group for a very long time. So I decided to take some time off and step back, but hopefully I will, figure something out, a way to get critiques starting next year. And then meanwhile, I also, have friends that I can always send work to. I can send work to Anne. I also occasionally send work to Kirk, who's in here. So, I think even if you don't have a, critique group that meets on a regular basis, if you sort of build your, community around you, you're going to have people that you can send your work to and get feedback from.
When you guys were querying, did you submit your entire dummy as author illustrators, or did you do it separately, or how did you do that?
I didn't query, so I can't actually answer that question. I'm sorry. New Jersey has a very active SCBWI chapter, so I met a lot of agents through there that I just followed up on with every time we had an event, and eventually I connected with one of them. So that's how I find it. Was with a portfolio though, not a dummy.
Do you recommend that all of us move to Jersey and join your Squibby chapter? Or?
I do. As the Illustrator coordinator, I would love that.
When I queried, I sent my whole dummy. My query process was sort of interesting. Back in I can't remember what year it was. It was 2013 or 2014. I went to an SCBWI conference. I went to the New York one, and I heard Stephen Malk speak. And the way he talked about how he worked with his clients and the way he wanted to sort of help them build their careers, I was like, that's the kind of agent I want. But I also was like, I cannot compete with his clients. That seems really, too much. So I sort of got in my head. I was like, I want to work with an agent that was at one point one of his assistants or worked with him and sort of has his agenting philosophy. So I was like, okay, Writer's House. And so I queried Stephen Barr, and he was like, I really love your book, but I don't know any editors that I think would acquire it. So why don't you, query these other 2 agents at Writer's House? And so then I sent it to them. And then, I ended up having my book seen by multiple agents at Writer's House. And then when I got the Don Freeman grant, then Stephen Malk emailed me and he was like, is your book still available? And I was like, but it's coming true. And so I signed with my agent, Lindsay Ald, who is at Writer's House. And so with that whole process, I sent my whole dummy. And I think that many, Writer's House agents ended up seeing the dummy. And that was sort of how I ended up with an agent.
Brenna, we have got more questions.
Yeah. How often do you guys communicate with your agents? Like once a week or as needed?
Definitely not once a week, because then she would be aware of how slowly I work on my projects. Basically as needed. It tends to be more like when a project is about to go out on submission, then we might communicate more. If we have a contract question that we need to work out, we might talk more during that time, but it kind of fluctuates. I don't think that like during a normal time though, I don't think I contacted my agent once a week ever, but maybe it could be once a month or it could be once every 3 months. It depends on how my projects are going. So.
Yeah,
How
I
long did
only
it take you
contact.
to- Oh, sorry, go
Oh.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say I'm the same as Anne. It's only as needed. Yeah.
So Anne, how long did it take you to find another agent after your first one left agency?
Well, only 3 days. I was fortunate in
Oh, wow.
that when she left agenting, she talked to the other agents at her agency beforehand. And so they kind of split up her clients. I mean, it was still my choice whether I stayed there or not at the agency, but I did talk to my agent. My agent is Charlotte Wenger at Prospect Agency. And so we had a Zoom conversation, and she seemed like she got my work and she was excited about the projects I was working on. So it felt like a good fit, and it was easier than going into the query trenches, which I had never actually been in. But I really like being at Prospect. I think it's a great agency. So I was happy that it worked out with me in Charlotte.
You seem like something of a unicorn in that you avoided querying from the get-go, and even when you lost your first agent. So you are the exception rather than the rule, it seems. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I know a couple of other illustrators that has happened for, because we tend to put our work is just easier to see, not in like we post it on Instagram, we have websites, like you can see our art, or like we have a portfolio showcase at a conference, say, so agents can see our art without us necessarily sending stuff to them. And I had conversations back and forth with an agent at Prospect who I didn't end up signing with. She connected me with a different one, but it was probably back and forth for a couple of years before they finally thought my portfolio was strong enough. So I didn't query, but it still took time.
I do think that, like Anne was saying, it's really different for illustrators. I think that probably the majority of illustrators I know got their agents some other way other than querying. It's either most of them through portfolio showcases or winning an award or just having their work online and visible, which, you know, the truth about art is it takes probably about like 2 seconds to decide if you like a piece of art or not. Whereas with someone's writing, you have to actually read the writing, and it takes a lot longer. And so then the query process makes a lot more sense for writers, but illustrators, our work is much more accessible very quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Brenna, what else we got?
Did you download any learnings from the editing process to your critique groups, or did it kind of go dark with them due to the nature of the process?
I feel like this was a weird time maybe to answer that question, because I started working on my book at the beginning of the pandemic. So I wasn't meeting with any, like my one critique group was in person. So it took us a little bit to get back to an online thing. So yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if it would have been different if I had talked to them more during the actual editing phase of this process. Because you, especially as an author illustrator, you get to a point where you're just working on art, and then you don't talk to anyone.
You don't want feedback.
It's your art.
Yeah, so for me, like once I get feedback from my editor, I just work on that with my editor, and I don't like to go to my crit group or other people, just because, yeah, it's no longer, it becomes a conversation just between me and my editor, and not involving all of these other people. It just becomes too many cooks in the kitchen.
All right. Any other final questions, Brenna, before we end the recording and just kind of go into the after party portion of this?
Yeah, there's a few more. I'll just
Okay.
ask this last one. Should writers make dummies even if they're absolutely not illustrators?
I think yes, you just don't necessarily send it to someone. Like if you are not an illustrator, you make a dummy to sort of understand the rhythm of your book and the pacing and that kind of thing. That can be very helpful. And sort of to figure out like where you intend to have a page turn. Is that natural for that? If someone else just reading the manuscript, would they also put the page turn in that same place? Like how do these rhythms work? But then you would not send that to an agent or an editor or someone like that because you're not the illustrator and they don't need to see that from you in order to understand your work.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I will stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And again, everybody's welcome to just stick around and we'll just kind of chat informally. But we will have more of these scheduled probably. I don't know if I think Audrey, I don't know. Do we have people already lined up? What do we have stored for the future?
Yeah, well, we just need to confirm the date for the October one, but we've already got 2 potential guests for that, and then someone slotted in for November as well.
Awesome. Okay. So we will keep you guys updated on that, and then look for our fun announcement on Friday about our name change from Taco Pitch to Cookie Pitch. So I'll just stop the recording here. Let's see.